I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. COVID-19 dominated education in 2021 and is already sowing its uncertainties in 2022. A new mayor and chancellor of education in New York City also speak to potential changes on the education horizon. As we move forward, what is the legacy of the DeBlasio administration? And what are the priorities for education in 2022? CUNY professor and education policy expert David Bloomfield joins me for a look at the past year in education and what lies ahead in these precarious times. Coming up now on EdCast. I'm so pleased to welcome back to EdCast David Bloomfield, professor of education, leadership, law, and policy at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center. He's the author of American Public Education Law and a sought-after consultant for public and private agencies. A testament to his expertise, he is the most mentioned among university faculty in state and local media. Thank you so much for joining us today on EdCast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here. Happy New Year.
Thank you, same to you. I don't have to say to you that COVID-19 dominated education as it dominated everything for the past 2 years. And of course, it's had all its attendant demands for helping us cope with the stresses that teachers and children and families have had and the shift to online learning. So if we have to think overall, how do you think we did in educating New York City students last year?
We did terribly. We did terribly, especially with the children who needed us most. Those children who didn't have the Wi-Fi or the devices or the family support that was needed for successful remote learning. Special education mandates were thrown out the window. Bilingual education mandates were thrown out the window. Children who are home insecure manifested even greater difficulties accessing learning. On the other hand, I mean, let me say that it probably was not salvageable. So I blame Mayor DeBlasio and the former Chancellor Carranza for really not getting us through it very well. But it's hard to see how they could have gotten us through it, you know, without all of those problems. So here we are, a new year, a new chancellor, and hopefully the ability to keep schools open, as the mayor and the chancellor are trying desperately to do. I have some problems with their bravado in that, but let's hope we are turning the page and getting back to in-school learning.
Let's talk for a minute then about that opening up the schools and the double-edged sword that it might be. Tell us what you see as some of the reasons why it really is important to keep the schools open. And then, of course, what are some of the factors that, you know, speak against it?
It's most important, of course, for in-school learning. The distance learning didn't work well for the vast majority of kids, even the kids who had the devices, even the kids who had the home support and the Wi-Fi. It was disastrous for so many. And so in terms of just what schools are mainly for, which is learning, it's important to have the schools open. It's also important so that kids can socialize with their peers, to see them, you know, not only their faces, but their bodies, and to play and to gossip and do all those things that are developmentally so important. And in some ways, I'm more concerned about the loss of that developmental time than I am about the sheer knowledge. You know, kids will learn to read, kids will learn to do math. It's harder, I think, to catch up in terms of social functions.
Yeah.
So we need schools to be open. On the other hand, there's danger out there. There's danger in terms of spread. There's danger in terms of the disease itself. And of course, we have extreme staffing issues. And so whether there's really a great deal of in-school learning going on at this point is highly questionable. Attendance rates are hovering or probably around 50%, between 50 and 75%, whatever the day happens to be. But also that means that a lot of schools probably have under 50% attendance by the students and severe staffing shortages as well. And again, that goes particularly for kids who are in mandated programs, bilingual education or special education.
I want to add to what you said. The social deprivation is really very severe for the kindergarten children. I mean, they're really seeing the kindergartners and the first graders coming back with really big social losses. Those early years of learning to be in school and learning to socialize in school are really hard to compensate for. So I think you're right. There's that going on. And of course, the schools also serve the community so much, right? I mean, so many kids depend on school for a meal, I suppose. So there's that. So I wanted then to ask you again about the emotional effects of COVID-19 on kids. I mean, so you mentioned the special needs students. What do you think schools could do? There's so many children who've suffered trauma. They've suffered parental loss, perhaps a tremendous amount of anxiety over a parent who might have been even a parent who had to take the subway every day. I mean, kids really worry. I know we did discuss this on the show, but do you have any thoughts about what you think schools could be doing or the new chancellor should be doing to help kids deal with some of the effects of what they've been through?
Well, we have a lot of new federal and state money. A lot of that money needs to be going into support systems so that we have social workers, more than one in a school, and counselors. So the main thing, and we have to make sure that the teachers are ready to deal with some of these severe problems, really on a daily basis. Discipline isn't the way to go. Suspensions aren't the way to go. And so we really need a massive systemic and interdisciplinary approach to social emotional learning. And it's an individualized approach. Every kid is going to be coming with a different package of needs. And we have to be ready for that. The money has to be there. The training has to be there. And I am concerned that in some schools, which I have been visiting, they seem to be doing an excellent job attentive to these issues. Others really have sort of a 5-minute a day check-in, and then that's the regular programming. And I think that that's difficult to do. It's kind of whistling in the dark that somehow everything will be all right, but everything is not going to be all right.
You mentioned earlier on that the whole idea of learning had really been sabotaged during the pandemic because of the distance learning and the online learning. And of course, from the tech people's point of view, it's been a wonderful thing. And I will say, for some of us who were more tech adverse in our teaching, we did learn some tricks. I mean, I learned some new things and some new approaches in teaching online. What do you see as the future of digital learning as we move forward and the need for online learning is not quite as great? Do you think it will disappear? What do you think will happen?
I think we're in a new age of, as I said before, kind of interdisciplinary and intermodal learning, so that there will be more technology in the classroom as well as out of classroom technology. But it's really that in classroom technology, I think that has the best promise of being constructive. We really need people on the ground in class, working with one another and using media as a tool rather than depending on the screen rather than personal interaction.
You know what I learned, David? This is one of the few times I really taught completely online. And I got better at it, but I was never great at it. But I noticed that my students thought I did a good job. And I realized that what I did was I was always there. I responded to every discussion board post immediately. I sent out announcements and I was talking to my colleagues about that. What they want the most is your interaction.
I think we need
Yep.
to be able to wean our students away from their phones and into classroom interaction.
There are studies that are indicating that when we read, we retain better reading through print rather than online, with the exception of very short things. But as people read more complex text, they tend to retain it better and comprehend it better when it's on print rather than on screen. But that's a whole other subject we can talk about. I want to go back to what you see as we look forward to 2022 and beyond in education. So let's start with the obvious. We have a new administration and we have a new chancellor. What is your take on the new chancellor?
Well, I think the chancellor comes in with obviously a great deal of knowledge about the New York City public schools system. That's where his career has been. At the same time, he's never been in a leadership position of the school system. At best, there have been a number of Eagle Academies, which he devised and was a principal and was the leader of that network. But that's just a small number of schools with a very specialized population of Black males. So he has a steep learning curve in terms of leading a diverse system of 1 million kids, 85,000 teachers. And so far, I'm concerned that there's been sort of a one soundbite agenda, which is in-school learning. It seems to me that somebody with the kind of background he has should be more selective about and nuanced in the policies that he implements. I would give a lot more discretion to principals. A principal who sees that their staff can't handle the number of kids coming in, or the number of kids coming in is not sufficient to have learning occurring, might need to close the school for a few days. And the school system should be supporting that principal discretion and making whatever systemic accommodations are needed for those school-based decisions, instead of having the chancellor, and this is another concern, become a mini-me to the mayor, who simply speaks about keeping schools open. And we might, as much as it breaks my heart, as much as I've said that I don't think online learning is adequate, it may just be necessary as a stopgap for a couple of days, a few weeks, while we get over this latest surge, because the schools themselves individually are having a hard time functioning, even if systemically there's a desire to keep them open.
I know in previous times that you've been on this program, you have spoken very bluntly that one of the major problems you see in our school system is that it is probably the most segregated school system in the country. And I know in last year, you were really hoping that the DeBlasio administration might make some positive steps in that direction. What do you think of this chancellor's ability to take on that issue?
Well, I think the chancellor has a huge ability to make strides in desegregating the school system. I'm not sure he has the desire. As I said, his background is, in fact, setting up segregated schools, segregated by gender as well as segregated by race. And I think the chancellor needs to think about the difference between running a small group of schools and running a school system for an entire city with the kind of diversity that we have, and the need for integration as a social strategy as well as an educational strategy. Segregation doesn't work when kids only have effectively mirrors that they're talking to, homogeneous backgrounds. We need to open up the system. We need to give more opportunities for white kids, Latino kids, Asian kids, and Black kids to study and work together.
Another issue that came up, and it doesn't really surprise me, is the debate over who should determine what kids learn in school. Suddenly parents feel very strongly that they should be determining, I say suddenly because when I went to school, that was never on the table, I suppose. Maybe it should have been, but it wasn't. And we see this particularly over things like critical race theory. How parents have, I believe many have misunderstood what it is and what it means, but the notion that they determine what gets taught. What's your feeling about that? What kind of role, if any, should parents have in the content and what gets taught in our classrooms? Who should decide that?
Parents should have a group right to have input into the curriculum. It's their school system, but it's also the school system of non-parents. Education is a public good. It is not it's not Trader Joe's where you go in and just kind of buy what you want to buy off the shelf. And so we need to be having these discussions. I think the discussions in New York probably have been more constructive than in some other parts of the country. So parents are obviously involved in the conversation, but as individuals putting their ideas into that marketplace of ideas that we like to see in the curriculum, rather than having a choice of what curricular matters they want to be involved, their children to be involved in, and which they don't. We can't function that way as a society, and we can't function that way as a school system.
And the issue of class sizes come up, and I do not believe, you can correct me, that the DeBlasio administration did anything in decreasing class size. Is that correct? I don't think any progress was made on that. How important is class size? I know some people think it's everything, but what's your take on the importance of class size?
Well, class size is an important determinant of success. It's not the only determinant of success. And of course, class size is a spectrum. Are we talking about 5 kids in a class, or are we talking about 15, or are we talking about 20, or are we talking about 35? And that makes a big difference based on the research and also the follow-up. It's class size is not a one-shot, whereas if you have one grade that's small and then the next grade is larger classes. So we should be able to reduce class size. Our school buildings are not set up for reducing class size. Our staffing levels aren't set up for reducing class size. And so I think that there should be a systemic objective toward reducing class size, with the union involved, with the city council involved, as it has been. But you can't just wave a magic wand and reduce class size to say 15 kids in an elementary school class.
Is it also a funding issue? And that leads me to how, what do you see as funding in terms of the new governor? Is she sympathetic toward the school system in the city? What do you think we can expect from her?
Right. Well, so first of all, class size obviously is a huge funding issue.
Yes.
Because if you reduce class size by half, you need to double your staffing. There is a lot of money in the system right now. Whether that money stays in the system, I think, is a battle. If you talk about parent activism should be directed not only at curricular matters, but at funding matters. We have to make sure that the COVID relief money is well spent. That money is going to disappear at some point. We have to make sure that the state promise to increase what's called foundation aid to the city remains high at the current levels and the promised levels. As soon as there's a budget downturn, the likelihood is that that promise will be broken, and all hell should break loose if they break that promise. At the same time, the city needs to be adequately funding the schools, and we don't look as much to the city nowadays as we do to the state for funding, but let's make sure that the city funding remains in place and that Adams and Banks put that money where it belongs, in the classroom, and not to increasing the bureaucracy at the Central Department of Education.
From what you know about Adams, how likely do you think it is that he will put money toward education?
There's just so much money that they can spend at Central. So with the vast resources that they have at the moment, I think that they will be putting money into the schools. Let's hope that it's well spent on quality teachers, on quality support services, and quality paraprofessionals who increasingly are taking on the burden of teaching kids, particularly in classrooms with special needs kids, and those people have to be qualified and not just add-ons.
Has Adams or Banks said how they feel about charters?
Well, Adams has said that he likes charter schools. Banks, on the other hand, has run a kind of charter-like system within the public school system. The Eagle Academies are public schools, but they have operated with a degree of discretion that charter schools obviously have, because charter schools are outside of the New York City public school system. What that means in terms of how Adams runs the schools, again, whether he gives more discretion to principals, or whether now that he's the chancellor, he would like to run a more top-down operation than existed with the Eagle Academy. Whether Adams likes charters or not isn't particularly relevant to how he runs the New York City public schools. My hope is that he doesn't run the New York City public schools and he allows David Banks, an educator, to set the education agenda. And my concern in these first months is that Adams is making the same mistake that DeBlasio made, which is to try to run the school system from City Hall rather than out of the Tweed Courthouse, where the Department of Education is headquartered.
Now, as we're running out of time, I do want to ask you then, we've already talked about a number of issues that are going to be coming up. Are there any other key issues for you that you would like to see this new administration tackle in terms of education?
Well, gifted and talented is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but it gets a lot of media attention. Adams has said that he wants to expand the number of gifted and talented schools, which I think is a mistake. I think, again, that's a segregative action, not only in terms of academic selection based largely on a single test for those competitive high schools that we have, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech primarily. But I'm worried that they're going to be going in the wrong direction, not only by over-resourcing an expanded network of gifted and talented schools, but by under-resourcing and not paying sufficient attention to what's it going to be? You know, if it's not the 99% of kids in regular schools, then it'll be 95% of kids in regular schools and 5% in the exclusively gifted programs. It's time to take that school advisory group, the student school diversity advisory group report written under Mayor DeBlasio off the shelf. And that's an excellent playbook for giving all children what they need, children who have academic talents and children who might not have academic talents, but are gifted in other ways.
You know, we did do a show not that long ago on gifted education, and even the advocates of gifted education, the strong advocates, were very critical of New York City's approach, which they said is unusual in testing children as young as the age of 4. And they were saying that they look to programs that are better, that don't even begin to test children until 3rd or 4th grade. That, you know, testing children that young and then siphoning them off. But yeah, so I was interested in that comment that they made, that they thought the city of all places was doing it in a really backwards kind of way. And of course, we did do the specialized high schools, as you know, very controversial in closing them or in changing the admissions criteria. But that is something that I know we have to look at. We're in the little time left. Is there anything that the de Blasio administration left us as a legacy that is worth continuing?
Well, of course, the first and maybe the only thing that comes to mind is early childhood education, pre-K education. So that seems pretty well baked in now. I'm happy about that. Right now, the requirement is that the city fund kids, families don't have to send their children to 3K or 4K programs, but I know a lot of families, upper income families who can afford it, who have 2K programs. And so we should be expanding the reach, expanding the quality, expanding the pay for private pre-K teachers, so that we really have a quality system that can run from age 2 and certainly supports even below that age, not necessarily formal schooling, but programs for families, childcare programs, as well as educational programs. And that then brings me to after school, which is an extremely important part of what's now been put into place with the federal money. And that should be expanded as well.
What about community schools?
Community schools are a good idea. They certainly predate Mayor DeBlasio. He expanded the program and promoted the program. There's a lot of federal money there too. And so the community schools are really a great idea to make sure that children have medical care, social services, and the schools increase their kind of community presence rather than just their 8:30 to 2:30 or 3:30 educational programs.
We are completely out of time. So I just want to thank you once again for joining me to take a look at what's ahead. We begin the new school year under the cloud of COVID-19, which I hope will be lifted somewhat. And I always appreciate your keen insights into what we are confronting in the educational school system. So I wish you a happy and a healthy year. And I hope we'll have a chance to speak again. So thank you so much, David Bloomfield. Thank you for joining us today, and stay with us in the coming year as we tackle some of the important issues confronting education.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.